Now, if Vermont Yankee were to drop out, and Vermont Yankee said, that's okay, I'm dropping out anyway, ISO would probably have to take action to ensure reliability. So remember, when you're talking about, oh, Vermont Yankee's 2% of the grid, Vermont is 4% of the grid. Remember, Vermont pays 4% here, pays 4% there. Vermont Yankee is half of Vermont, and it's very important for the area it's in. Let me look at okay, how does ISO measure reliability? The criteria is something called N-1-1, which means N is normal on a hot day. And they have a very clear definition of this on a hot day, which is something like 90% of the hottest day in the last 2 years. It's by definition, it's a bureaucracy. Okay, -1 means that one major power plant or one major transmission line is out of service. If -1 again happens, then another major out of service, and the grid is still operating well at N-1, then the grid is considered to be reliable by the ISO. In other words, the ISO doesn't try and set it up so that an infinite number of transmission lines can go down, and yet it's N-1. That's the criteria. Does everybody understand what I'm saying with that? Okay. Without Vermont Yankee, the N condition would be equivalent to N-1 now. And the local grid would probably not be N-1 since it will be starting at the current N-1, which would mean that ISO would take action. ISO actually does something about these things. It doesn't just say, ooh, it does something about it. And what would it do? It would either require additional transmission capabilities. I don't know how quickly they would be built. Yes?
I'm very well aware that Velco has almost completed a new transmission line paralleling the old one, all the way from Vermont Yankee up through Cavendish and so forth, all the way to St. Louisburg in the last year.
Right. They're already taking some action.
That must be why. I wanted to know why they're building it. Who would dare to build it with talk of closing Vermont Yankee?
Well, maybe they're planning another hunk of that transmission line a little further north. I mean, okay. One of the things about this is that both Velco and Department of Public Service and ISO, they are all government agencies. And so they really can't tell you what they're going to do, what they're planning to do, because then if they decide to do something else, you could sue them. You could say, hey, you said you were going to build a transmission line, you never built a transmission line, you brought in gas turbines instead. So they're very closed-mouthed. They say, well, that's why I've got all these words probably here, because when I talk to them, they will say, well, we're not saying we're going to do this, you see. We're saying we're doing something. Now, in Connecticut, in 2003, there was an area of Connecticut that fell off their standards. It was eastern Connecticut, and they didn't have enough transmission lines. And they said, okay, it's not meeting N-1, N-1. So I have a blog post about this. You can see it if you want. I'll talk about that later. But anyway, what they did was they issued a request for proposal for people to bring in diesel and gas turbine generators into that area of Connecticut so that they would meet their reliability standards. And those were brought in. Then the reliability standards were met. Now, of course, the people of ISO had to pay for this. I mean, ISO doesn't have any money beyond its computers and its staff, you know. So the people had to pay for this, and power bills went up. And of course, fossil fuel use was, I frankly don't like diesel generators. They're not really that friendly in terms of, what do you call it, environmental impact. I don't consider them particularly friendly, diesel generators. Anyway, ISO isn't going to do this. They're not going to put out an RFP or put out for diesel generators or put out a request to build a new transmission line unless they know they really, really have to. And that's the bottom line of why Vermont Yankee was not allowed to drop out of the 2013 situation. Okay? And so, we have a wrap-up slide. Yes, that's clever. The wrap-up of all this is that electricity dispatch and pricing is complicated. It depends on a lot of things. It depends on line losses. It depends on reliability standards, N minus N minus 1, that nobody's ever heard of. Well, some people have heard of it, but you know, most of us would go like, that's what I did when I did it. And ISO insists on reliability. If you decide to think globally, the grid is huge, right? That means it's got New Hampshire and Maine and Connecticut and Rhode Island. Vermont Yankee is only 2% of it, no problem. If you think locally, like people are supposed to, Vermont is 4% of the grid, and Vermont Yankee is 2% of grid generation, and that area is going to have some problems without Vermont Yankee. And those problems will probably not be solved by wind turbines. They will probably be solved by diesel generators and or transmission lines to other parts of the grid. And they will be, and it will be inefficient because, let's face it, people want to sell power nearby. Because we saw that number about the line loss coming from New Brunswick. I didn't make that up. I took a picture of it. And if you looked at the same thing for the area around Vermont Yankee, you would see a line loss of like 3 cents rather than $6 or $5.85. So you're just asking to waste energy and bring in who knows what in terms of grid reliability without it. But as I say, if you prefer to think globally, problemo, the good old, the electricity will just come flooding in from other places. And that's basically it. That's my little talk about it.